Hello and welcome to Revenue Unscripted, the show for B2B founders, CEOs, advisors, and leaders, where we unpack what really drives stronger revenue and margins, not just product or process, but people and behaviors. I'm your host, Jennica Dixon, president at the Slattery Sales Group, and together we'll dive into how real organizations build high-performing revenue cultures, avoid costly mistakes, and turn complex selling into predictable growth. Today, I have the privilege of being joined by Doug Norton. Doug is a tech savvy, AI forward customer success executive. He blends people and playbooks to build world class post sales organizations. He began his career as a big four management consultant and more recently scaled revenue engines with organizations ranging from startups to Fortune 500 businesses, including brands like Float, Bill, and Dell. Doug holds a BS in information systems from BYU and an MBA with honors from UC Berkeley has, and currently resides in Utah's Silicon Slopes, where he spends his time as a startup advisor, community builder, and outdoor enthusiast. Doug, thank you so much for joining me today. I know you're incredibly busy, and it is a privilege to have you on with us today.
Jennica, great to be here. Honored to be on the show.
Thank you. Well, for listeners who haven't met you yet, could you just give them a really quick flyover of how would you describe the work that you do in post sales? Because I have to admit, I'm super excited to have you here. I've spent most of my life in revenue, in sales, and then, the sales are handed off to somebody else. So tell us a little bit about the work that you do in post sales.
Yeah, look, I'm somewhat accidental in customer success. I was started my career in the .com and early cloud era when all things internet were very exciting, but customer success as a practice didn't exist. And so there's a lot to unpack in the prompt, but I'll approach it with this. Look, when I started as a consultant, it was all about how do you bring more value to your clients? Because if you're bringing value to your clients, they're going to bring you more work. They're going to refer you to other potential clients in the future. And that's how you grow as a consultant. That philosophy translates very well over to a customer success application. Plus, as a consultant, I was working with clients to help them solve for the massive install bases of customers they had. Now, at the time, we were still in the CapEx world where customers were buying software that they would have for 3 to 5 years before they had to talk about buying software again. That's different now. But even in that world, these tech companies were looking at it as we have this install base of customers. How do we get more value? How do we maintain relationships so that we can expand, cross-sell, retain that business when it comes up for renewal? And so those are great problems to solve as a consultant. And I've been super excited to follow the wave of customer success and see it grow as a practice across the tech industry over the past several years.
I love that. And I think it's really interesting how your approach is in helping your clients maximize their revenue and their margins from their base. And the beautiful thing about the marketplace is the only way to extract that much value is to bring that much value. And
Right.
when we were talking earlier, you mentioned a really interesting thing, and I'm just going to jump right in. I had this listed as like number 4 on my list of priorities. Man, I'm pulling this up to the top because this was so insightful. You referenced a Bain study that
Yeah.
talked about how what companies think their customers value is perhaps not what they actually value. Can you unpack that a little bit? Because you just mentioned, I mean, you dropped an absolute gold nugget when you mentioned that in order to, you want to, as a company, extract value out of your installed base, but the only way to really do that is to bring more value, to somehow have more value for them than your competitor. Can you unpack that Bain study a little bit for us?
Absolutely. And maybe just for context, before I jump into that Bain study, look, Greg Danes has done some phenomenal thought leadership in this space around retention and specifically not just value, but helping customers arrive at or achieve the objectives they set out to achieve. They come to vendors with problems that they're looking to solve. They want their lives to be easier. They want to drive more value for their businesses. They want to grow their personal careers, not just grow their businesses, right? And so they come to a vendor with a problem to solve. And when they sign up, there's an agreement of trust there. And the interesting thing that Greg Danes has really unpacked is the impact of vendors holding themselves accountable to tracking and reporting on the value or the measure at which those customers have met the objectives they set out to achieve. And what is shown is, look, if you take a standard customer where you're not tracking it, there's a baseline of average customer lifetime there. If you just track and hold yourself accountable to a metric, even if it's a bad metric, Greg's data has shown that will double the average lifetime of a customer.
Whoa.
It's phenomenal. Now, if you have just a mediocre or good metric, not even exceptional, but if you just have a good metric, it doubles again. Now you have 4x to the average lifespan of a customer. And so there's a real important talk track here about how do you then make sure that your customers are getting the value that they are looking for. Now, this comes back to the Bain study, because then there's this idea, just like in any communication, there's the how I want to be perceived versus how I'm actually being perceived. Same with customer relationships with their vendors. Here are the things that customers value versus here are the other things that the vendors think the customers value.
Ooh.
And what the Bain study illuminated, and this came out about a year and a half ago, it was a fascinating study. They ranked 6 areas, and the most interesting piece was the rankings for 5 out of the 6 matched, meaning like the order of this one, then that one, right? And so they tracked. With the 1 out of the 6 was an exception. The number one thing that customers valued was technical services. The ability of the vendor to be able to jump in with deep product expertise to help them when it mattered. Now, that could come in the context of support. That could be in the context of a technical account manager or another professional service. But technical services was the number one thing, because when problems happen, the customers need to be able to trust that the vendors have the technical services to be able to meet that need. Conversely, the perceived value rankings from vendors ranked technical services number 6 on their list.
Wow, that's a disconnect.
It was a big disconnect. And so as we think about it, now there's even more, I would say, happening now with AI. When you think about tech-savvy customer success managers, it's becoming more and more important that customer success managers, and I would argue customer success leaders and executives, become more well-versed in data, in language models, in technical workflows and automation. That is becoming super critical to just running the operations of post-sales and customer success. But even before the last year and a half of explosion with Claude and other AI tools that are changing the world, even then, customers valued that technical acumen in their customer success teams. We're seeing a big push of commercial acumen among customer success leaders and customer success teams. And we can spend a lot of time talking about that. I have loads of thoughts there, but it does not take away the value that customers have first and foremost of the technical services.
That's very interesting, because everybody's talking about AI and those skills. I'm very curious, could you go kind of one level deeper into that? Because I think there are a lot of things one could do, but very few things one should do to excel in growing and retaining your client relationships so that they stay longer and you can maximize value from them, and of course bring them more value while you do. So can you help? What would you tell an executive if you were talking to a CEO and they have limited resources to invest, but they know that they need to level up their CS team so that they are more tech savvy when it comes to these, I don't necessarily want to say trendy technologies, but these timely technologies? What would you tell them to prioritize? Because again, there's a lot one could do, but there are perhaps maybe there's a short list of things that one ought to do.
Yeah. Look, I think it's fascinating, but I'm going to rewind the clock here for a minute because I'm a Zennial generation in between the Gen X and the Millennial. And the unique aspect of my generation was that we lived through tech transfer, like the big tech transformation of computers becoming ubiquitous.
Oh my goodness! Did you have an AOL account too?
Yes.
Yes.
and I had a modem. And I had the modem that screeched at high-pitched noises. I mean, very old, right? And
Me too.
so,
I think we're probably the same age. I love this.
look, computers, that was not a trend. It is here, and it is here
Right.
to stay. And I think AI feels very similar, where
Yeah.
yes, there are certainly elements of hype and trends that are within the AI ecosystem. I'm not saying that all AI players are going to last for the long term, as with any new technology. However, the underlying fundamentals, I see very similar themes. We saw the same kind of thing happen in .com, right? Just because there was a .com bubble and bust didn't mean that .com was a bad idea. The internet is ubiquitous now, and we've seen that. It's proven itself to be a durable technology. And so, we're seeing, again, very similar trends here. And
So
so,
I'm sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Keep going. My
Oh,
question, I guess, is as you look ahead to what will be durable. And I can explain my perspective as I ask this question first. I grew up in the sales industry. My parents started this company 4 decades ago when I was a little girl, and the trend every few years has been to predict the death of a salesman. We're in sales. Everybody has been hoping for the
yes.
death of a salesman since the play came out many decades ago. And so every CEO has been hoping that that horrendous expense on their books can finally be eliminated. And I have seen executives get excited about this from the time I was really, really little. I mean, we auto dialing technology. Oh my goodness, we won't need as many salespeople to dial phones. Well, you do, because now we have more conversations. It's funny how that works.
Yes.
It's little things like that. And of course, the AI boom, everybody's like, we don't need BDRs anymore. And this is like any other part of technological advancements. I mean, we still have people working in the textile industry. We still have people working in the military, even though they're not knights on horseback. There are technological innovations, but there are still human elements. And so I'm curious, as you look ahead to the technological changes, what do you see as remaining durable in the technology? And what do you see as remaining durable in the human side of the post sales experience? Where will the human bring most value to a company? And where will the technology, the AI especially, bring most value to a company?
Yeah, you're spot on. Look, in the early 1900s, when, as the radio technology was evolving, there were similar headlines in newspapers saying no more sales reps are needed because now there's mass communication.
Right.
This is,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
so,
And then a few decades later, video killed the radio star.
yes,
We just keep on
yeah,
cycling through.
yeah. And so, look, the world is changing. But I think what we've seen with each evolution of technology is that the human to human connections are prevalent and durable. And as long as economic buyers remain human, much of the sales experience remains emotional. And we could talk about churn. I've seen emotions factored into churn in some cases, even more so than economic decision making, right?
I would
Uh,
love to hear more about that in a minute. Put a pin in it.
Yeah. And so as we think about the path forward, what has happened with each evolution of technology is that it allows us to be more productive with our time, more efficient. You think about how many letters were being sent in the early 1900s, not very many. But then now with email and with even shorter messaging, like with X or Facebook or other platforms where you can send very short messages and get your communication out. It doesn't stop the human element, but it makes us as humans more productive. And so when I think about AI, it's much more in the context of how do I make the humans that we have better at doing what humans do best, which is creating emotional connections, creating the relationships, and maintaining the trust with customers.
I love that. And the trust kind of goes back to what you were talking about a few minutes ago, which is continuing to bring value. What did they buy? And I,
Yeah.
I never quite unpacked that a few minutes ago. The idea that, and this sounds so simple, did they extract value out of what they bought? Did they get the value out of what they bought from you?
Yeah.
And it seems like the question should answer itself. The fact that they bought it means they got value out of it, and it's in use and it's up and running. But that isn't always the case. And I want to highlight that for our listeners, because I didn't do a very good job highlighting that earlier. I think that's a lot deeper and more profound than it sounds like on the surface. It sounds very
It is.
straightforward, but it's not. is it?
I see a lot of customer success and post-sales organizations that are reporting on usage. And it's easier to report on usage now than it was maybe 20 plus years ago because of telemetry and other technologies. But usage isn't necessarily value. For example, you might have some software where you're saying, look, the fact that I'm using it means it's taking more of my time. So more usage isn't necessarily more value. You can have situations that
Wow.
are very connected like that. And so while usage is an important perhaps input or factor, it's not the value in and of itself. I learned this years ago. Look, when I built the customer success motion for enterprise data center software at Dell. It started as a sales intelligence team that I was asked to build from the ground up. And so we were building out this new motion, providing the sales teams with insight into customer usage in their data centers, how much capacity was being consumed within their data centers across a variety of different technologies. So again, that was earlier 2000s. Usage data wasn't as prevalent or accessible and available as it is today. And so that was a needed input for sellers if they were going to sell any expansion or cross-sell or the renewal sales. They wanted to know how much was the customer using, because if they're using it, then theoretically we can sell more of it. Now,
Sure.
what that principle translated into was, well, we learned a few things. One, that was great for sellers. Some of those customers would show up at these negotiation tables, though, and it felt like, hey, I don't even know you as the account manager. Maybe you're a different account manager than the person I spoke to a couple of years back. No one's been talking to me. I don't know if I agree with the usage. Let me go check. And we found that there was this gap. Now, this was, again, before customer success. We were a sales intelligence team. What we found was there was a need to provide customers with the same level of insight that we were providing our sellers. That the customers also wanted to know how much they were using. Were they, they had a business case for how much capacity they would consume, how quickly they would deploy technologies across their data centers. How were they doing? They wanted to know that information. And so very quickly we realized, well, we can do that. That's our team already is doing this for our sellers. We can provide these as deliverables to our customers. We call them a health check deliverable. One of our customers, and this was one of our top tier customers where we had a more white glove experience, you could say, a much higher touch engagement model. They specifically asked us. Now, in this world of enterprise sales, you often have a disconnect between the primary user and the economic buyer, right?
Yes.
Procurement teams will be separate from the IT administrator running the show. And so the primary user came to us and said, hey, this is great, but I need to go talk to my procurement team and they want to see dollars saved. Can you get that to me?
Interesting. They needed
Because
it translated.
exactly, it was the translation. We were reporting out on usage, but that didn't necessarily mean value, or at least the procurement team didn't know how to convert it over.
That's
And
your metric. That's not
that
their metric.
correct. And that was the first real insight for us. We for that customer, we built an add-on to the health check. We called it our validate the value, where we were actually able to go back to the original business case. We knew the value that they were looking to derive, and we were able to show, based on the contract that you struck and based on the usage that you've accumulated over the time that you've been under this contract, we could convert that to hard dollars saved relative to the kind of counterfactual scenario of what the previous scenario would have been for them and what their prior pricing was that we were benchmarked against when striking the deal. And so it was impactful for that customer. We ended up taking that as a template and scaling it across all of the deliverables. And it was one of the highest impact moves that we made, was actually putting in dollar terms what was the value that the customers were able to derive from the contracts that they struck with us. And that's a principle, I think, that has translated across, right? Look, in some scenarios, it's easier to quantify that value than others, but that's where you come back to the Greg Dane study. Like, even if you're tracking something and you don't do a great job with with hitting the objective, just showing that you're making the attempt, that you're holding yourselves accountable, and that you have a path, a success plan to getting there, can still double the average lifetime with customers, because they trust that as long as you're tracking it and you're transparent and you have integrity in how you're reporting that out, they're more bought into that relationship as opposed to flying blind and not knowing if they're getting any sort of value from the back end.
I love that. And you used the term trust again, and everything that you were just describing is very human, human to human connection. Um, Building that trust, establishing that relationship, and letting it be a human relationship that they want to continue forward with, but it's completely driven by data accuracy and very rich information. When we're working with sales teams on the front end, and they're out in the marketplace and they're having the conversations that generate revenue, one of the things we work with them very deeply on is what is the currency of the realm? Because they've got things they want to talk about. They've got things that they're very proud of in their very well engineered solution. But that might not have any value to their prospects in the marketplace. And the question that we always ask them is, what is the currency of the realm? What does this prospect in this enterprise value, and what is their currency for measuring that? I mean, is it hours saved in the system? Is it time? Is it human power? Is it money? And a lot of our clients think that it's some form of money. Like, we'll save them $1 billion, but that might not be the currency of the realm. It's what they do with that money that matters more. And so what you're unpacking here is incredibly helpful for sales teams and customer success teams. I mean, it's one beautiful continuum in taking care of that customer relationship, and I think that's awesome. It's really beautiful. And I asked to put a pin in something you said earlier about churn and emotion. Can you go back to that? Because I think it's very related to
Yeah.
what you just talked about in terms of um, tracking these things and coming back to the customer and building that trust and saying, we are validating and doing, and you can trust us. Can you unpack the churn and emotion?
Yeah. It's important to be data led and data driven as an organization. But it's also easy to over index on maybe a few select metrics that can mask the broader picture. One of the things that I do with teams very early on is I'll do time studies. And it's just a matter of understanding, like, okay, for our customer success managers, for our customer facing reps, like, where is the time going? And so partly it's, I want to understand, like, what percentage of their time is spent with customers, creating those human connections, so that I can know, okay, for all the time that isn't with customers, what's it going to? Because I want to try and reduce as much of that as possible. There's an AI play there. However, I also from that find a lot of times, like, hey, for the customer facing time, or even customer related time, I'll call it the grind work of, yeah, maybe I'm not interfacing with a customer, but there's a lot of just doing work for the customer. What I find is I call them the sleeping giants. The situations where oftentimes these are larger customers, they're pushing maybe out the boundaries of what you would consider your ideal customer profile or ICP. They start to break things in the product, and it's very natural for a customer success manager who is incentivized to retain that business to do heroic acts to try and retain that customer, and which it can often include a lot of manual effort on the back end that isn't built into the product because it's just not yet on the product roadmap. It's not a big enough problem to fully build it in. And so there's an element of trust that the CSM tries to maintain there. And this kind of comes back to the metrics. If all you're looking at, and I've heard this from some teams where they say, we don't have a churn problem. And then you start to dig in and you realize maybe your churn looks great, but you have a lot of sleeping giants, meaning you have a lot of human manual effort going into retaining these customers. And if you were to go through a cost cutting exercise and strip back that customer success time in any way, those customers would likely churn very quickly, because what they have become accustomed to and what they are relying on to maintain that level of trust with you as a vendor, maybe it's the technical services we talked about earlier, is some other service layer. It's being masked because, again, the CSM is doing some heroic act to retain that business that isn't fully being reflected in a logo churn metric or an NRR metric. And so it's so important to really peel back the covers to know, like, okay, great, here's how we stand as a business, but what's happening at the detailed level? And I think customer success leaders who don't know what's happening in that level of detail with their teams are frankly flying blind in a lot of regards. They need to really understand what's happening with their customers, where is the time being spent with their teams in order to achieve the metrics that are being shown.
That is profound. And I support that wholeheartedly because we have seen something very similar in our work with organizations across the marketplace in different industries. One of the patterns we've picked up on is sometimes a company doesn't know exactly what their true competitive advantage is. Let's say they're selling a great product, and over time, the competitive edge that they had over their competitors narrows because, of course, competitors are going to catch up, patents expire, the marketplace landscape shifts, and the terrain that you were competing on yesterday is not the same that you're going to win on today. But not everything necessarily gets updated and information doesn't quite flow. We're not omniscient. We don't know all things. And so as humans, we just keep leading these organizations and we think we're selling a product. However, the real advantage that a company might enjoy over their competitor in the marketplace is perhaps in customer service. And we have seen this play out where a new buyer comes in. I had this a couple years ago where I knew a company. They were purchased in a private equity transaction, and the new owners came in and they said, "This is a great product. We're very proud of the product. We're going to double down and invest in the product. And wow, we are spending a ton over here in customer success, in client service, and it was specifically in onboarding, and it was a difficult product. And the catch is, other companies also sold this product." And they didn't have quite the competitive edge they thought they had on the product side. But when it came to the onboarding piece, they excelled and they made it easy to adopt. And unfortunately, they came in and they cut it, and word very quickly got out in the marketplace. This is now a real pain to work with, and that competitive edge got lost. And it's exactly what you're talking about. There was a lot of hand-holding, onboarding, but even the team running that didn't quite recognize how valuable they were. And if even they didn't understand how much value they were bringing to the enterprise just by doing what they do every day, how could the strategic plan account for that value that they're bringing to the marketplace and that extra edge that they were bringing? So I think that's incredibly profound to get that clarity on the team itself first. And I'm curious, have you seen it play out where that enhanced clarity allows the company to kind of build a moat around that? Like, we're actually really good at this and we're going to protect it. Or is it something where they're like, whoa, that's a lot of hand holding. We got to build this into the product map.
Yes, both. I think, look, it's very easy, especially when pushing for product-led growth, to build for the masses. If you just look at the topics or themes that are coming up in tags in your support call volumes and using that as a proxy for what are the topics that of product gaps or product feature requests that customers care about, you're going to hear from the masses, from the volume. That's the long tail. And so, yes, I think having this time study data, understanding where CSMs are spending the time, understanding what customers really need, it brings so much more of the story to light. And what it starts to do is it starts to say, hey, look, we might only have a handful of customers who care about this, but if we start to correlate that with value, this might be just as important as some of the other things that the masses care about. So now you can have an intellectual conversation about prioritization of the roadmap based on the value. But you have to first unpack and know what's happening, because again, it can be masked because it's not a data metric that's shown. It's just time being spent to save a lot of these customers. And it's very common. I've seen it with many customer success teams for top tier customers. It's common for those top tier customers to push the limits of the product, and it's common for those CSMs to do everything to move heaven and earth to try and retain those customers' business over the long run. And again, it is often hidden because there's not a great metric that shows that, unless you're looking at time. Time studies can be a challenge, but I think a light lift time study, even something that just looks at simple time blocks through the course of a week can illuminate loads of insight and information about the customer relationship.
Right. And it's with that information that you can make your next strategic decisions. Do we invest here on this side? Do we invest over here instead? That's really where that fodder for decision making can come from. I want to ask you, and I know this is a bit of a segue. I want to ask you about leading. We've talked a lot about the human element today. I mean, obviously, we are very dedicated to adopting the AI technology and all of the new things that come about to make us more efficient. But at the end of the day, we're still humans. And I noted from your background that you have led teams across vast geographies. You have lived around the world, you have led teams around the world. There is a human element still of leading teams, and humans are perhaps a challenging variable to lead. So I'm very curious, how do you ensure high performance in the incredibly human side of protecting revenue for companies that are perhaps scattered around the world? They've got teams scattered around the world, they're remote. How do you ensure solid performance? And I mean, I saw your NPS scores were awesome. So please talk to that as well. How do you do that while leading teams that are geographically diverse and in companies where your clients are also geographically diverse? I would love for you to unpack that a little bit. How do you do that?
Yeah, look, I'm grateful for the experiences that I've had, been able to travel the world, meeting with clients and customers on nearly every continent. And then, yes, I've spent a lot of years in the Bay Area near San Francisco, but spent a year living in London, spent a year living in Boston. I've lived in Texas, currently in Utah. But I think it really gives me an appreciation for diversity of culture and backgrounds and experiences. And so, that diversity is one superpower I think teams have. Look, if I maybe take a tangent here just for a minute, I am an avid cyclist. I love road cycling. And if anybody is into road cycling, when you build a professional cycling team, you'll know there isn't just a one type of rider that you get. There's not like a single profile of a professional rider. You'll have climbers, people who are exceptional at climbing. And when you have a mountain climb to handle, you need climbers. You have other road cyclists who are exceptional sprinters. Maybe they're not great for a long distance, but they're really good for the last few kilometers of the race, right? And they will sprint to the finish line, and they know all the game of how to win there. You'll have other people who are long distance or long hauler riders, meaning they're not the sprinter, maybe not the climber, but they're the semi truck. They can just go for a long time. And so when you have a long distance ride over a consistent course, they're your long haulers. There are others who are protectors. When you have crosswinds, their job is to protect your elite rider, to make sure the elite rider can spare as much energy. Because look, when you have a cycling team, there's this, you create what's called the peloton. Or not just within a team. You'll see this if you watch the Tour de France. They all ride very close together. And it's very dangerous because you're riding at high speeds. But what happens in a peloton, and you can do this in a smaller extent within a team, is you get an aerodynamic effect. And what that means is the rider in front takes the brunt of the wind, right? They're feeling all the air, but then they break up the air, and it creates this kind of a bubble effect behind them. And so you can have as much as a 40% reduction in effort happening for riders behind the lead rider. I've seen this myself. I go out on solo rides, and I know what my average speed is for a solo ride, and I've calibrated that. When I go out on a group ride, 4th of July is a great one here locally. There are about 80 riders who wake up and get out at 4 in the morning and go for a 100-mile ride to start the 4th of July. My average speed on that ride is 25% faster because I'm riding in a peloton with 80 other riders. And yes, I take my turn at the front, but then 90% of my time I get to spend inside the peloton protected. And so even though I'm still pushing my weight forward, I don't have to deal with the wind holding me back. And so the same happens with teams. When you build a team, if you have just one profile of person, one type of background, like that's not your top performing team. So I spent a lot of time designing teams that emphasize the power that comes with diversity, having some mountain climbers, having some sprinters. Each, you might have a consistent job description, but every person brings their own wild cards to the table of value based on their unique backgrounds and experiences. And then we try and tap into that as a team to say like, hey, maybe you own this account, but there's some other people here who really know how to handle this situation well. Let's make sure we're tapping their experience as you're managing through this situation, right? So diversity is a big part of it. And that has, I think, come over time as I've been exposed to so many different cultures and peoples around the world. But secondly, look, you talked about ENPS, and I've had some incredible leaders, incredible teams, and really been thrilled to work with and see the impact that has had. And a lot of that is transparency and accountability, but it goes in both directions. So with teams, I like the transparency and accountability, providing them with very clear expectations. There should be no gray area of them walking away at the end of a day or the end of a week wondering, did I do a good job? Am I in trouble? Am I doing a great job? Am I crushing it? Right. And even if you have a quota metric, that's great. But sometimes people can get lucky and sometimes people can get unlucky on a quota metric.
Yes.
And so what
Yes.
are the other factors? You could have maybe you just got hit with a COVID style pandemic and the market has turned. And even though you're doing all the right things as a rep, the market's terrible and your customers are churning. And now am I going to get fired? And so having some super clear, here are the expectations of the job. Yeah, we get paid on how the business performs and your ability to influence that measure. But then there's this other set of just expectations for the job. And if you're doing these things, you're winning the day. You can walk home at the end of the day, pat yourself on the back and know you're crushing it. And if you're not doing these things, then there's no surprise when it comes time for feedback that you're missing the mark on these expectations. I think that's super important for people. I think it's also important to have fun. And look, one of the exciting things that's happened, kind of evolved since the COVID era, is that there are loads of online engagement tools now for global teams. And I love leaning on these. They're online games. Many of them are free. There are even online service and volunteer engagement opportunities. If you haven't checked into these, there are loads of them. They're incredible. I'm a huge proponent of volunteerism in my community, and these online volunteering capabilities, and some of them are help train our tools. There's like wilderness. They need to scan the population of birds or other types of animals, and you can help train their AI to recognize the animals in this population on their cameras.
It's really cool.
There are others that are like, hey, play this game with words, and for every point you earn, there's a grain of rice that's donated to the World Food Organization, right? Like there are so many good things that teams can be doing. So I think that engagement level is important for teams. And then there's the transparency in the other direction, which is, look, the predictive index categorizes me as a maverick style leader. My personality is built for transformation and rebuilding. But so while I do strive for stability with teams, I also recognize that when there are things that aren't working as well as they can, we need to reinvent this. We need to innovate. We need to push this forward, and we need to do it quickly. But there's a difference when there's a top-down approach that's either uninformed by the people or where the people are uninformed about what's going on. And what I've learned is it's so critical. Number one, leaders can make better informed decisions by bringing their teams along for the ride. But then teams are more bought in and engaged when the change happens and through the change management curve, if they were brought along, if they had the opportunity to provide their input so their voices were heard, and if they were informed to the extent that they can be. There is some confidentiality of things that can't be shared, but to as much as the leader can be sharing the updates of what's coming to set the expectations. In my experience, it's a game changer for teams as they go through. So I do think building the right teams with transparency, having transparency and accountability, both top down and bottoms up for performance management, and then through the change management curves. I think all those elements are so critical for teams in today's era.
I love that. And there's, again, there were a few things you said that I want to just double click on it because it's a lot more profound than it might sound. Like when you said clear expectations, there is so much there. And I have seen this play out in the marketplace where leaders think that they've made things clear. And then because sometimes we're brought in to help on the revenue generating side, what's what's the team performance looking like? What are we doing? What are the metrics? And leaders think that there's a lot of clarity, and then we ask for, well, what are they being held to? What are behaviors that are expected? And they're like, well, there's a quota.
Yes.
Okay. And how were the territories determined? How were those handed out? How were those roles aligned? And then how, when new stuff comes in, how does that get divvied up? Because there's a lot that can be altered over time, and the expectations can shift, and we can think that we're being a lot clearer around what's expected than we really are. So I had to double click that, because there's a lot of depth in there, and it, to all the leaders who are listening, it sounds simple and straightforward what Doug is saying. It is not easily executed. It's from what I've seen in a lot of different organizations, we think we're being clearer than we are. And I think you are absolutely right. The compounding effect of that clarity, that transparency, and around expectations, it's not harsh, it's not hard. It is simply clear for everybody. Nobody will mind understanding more, and nobody will mind being understood. And it's okay to pursue that. And I love that. I have so many questions to ask you. I have to narrow it down because I also have to honor your calendar here. So I'm aware that I do need to land this plane. When you and I were talking earlier, there was a phrase that kept coming up when we were talking, and this is kind of around the post sale world in general, but especially around just ensuring client success. And the phrase that kept coming up is revenue insurance, because it's very satisfying to win new business. It's very satisfying to generate revenue, but to keep generating revenue is a whole new challenge. And we often tell our customers, the moment you sign that contract, your best customer is listed on your competitor's forecast. Like the moment you sign it, it's now a target for them. So can you talk a little bit about the role of CS as that revenue insurance? Because I think sometimes it's overlooked. We love to celebrate the wins, but what happens after the win can be really critical in that long tail. And I would love to hear your thoughts unpacking that a little.
Yeah, and let me caveat this, because we talked earlier about the importance of technical services. And sometimes people in technical roles are averse to the idea of being in a sales role or being tied to revenue. So let me unpack that. Look, years ago, I remember making an offer to a person, and it was through our recruiter. And the recruiter got back to me and said, hey, this person has expressed a concern that it's called a customer success manager role, but they feel like it's a sales role. Can you talk to them? And so I was like, happy to talk to them about this. And the way I framed it in the conversation was, look, there are a number of differences between this role and a traditional sales role. First and foremost, there's like base to variable comp ratios. Like our sellers on the front end are on it was like a 50-50 or 60-40 type of split. Right. On the back end, we're more of an 80-20 or 70-30, right? So there's a difference in just the pay structures and compensation models. There's also a difference in the sense of like sellers on the front end are cold calling, or maybe they get a semi-warm lead, but those are not customers. We're talking to customers. They are already using our product. If anything, if they're upset, it's not. It's just because something isn't working, and you get to go in and solve it. So these are much warmer relationships, right? Like there were a number of those, and then I got to the point about, but is it like are you selling things? And so while yes, there is an upsell, a cross-sell capability in post-sales, the way I framed it was this. I said, look, we're first and foremost advisors. I think there are three different flavors of customer success that I see out there. There's the support flavor, which is kind of like an escalations team within support. They're just firefighters. Right. And they're very reactive. There's the advisor flavor of customer success. It oftentimes is even a professional service. In some areas, you'll see this version of customer success be a paid service that customers pay for access to these CSMs. And then there's the pure sales version of customer success, where customer success managers don't spend as much time focusing on customer value. It's more about prospecting into the customer base to sell the next things.
Sure.
And so I think the most powerful version of customer success that I've seen aligns with, if you're familiar with the challenger sales methodology, it is
Yeah.
advisors first. If we can get that customer, if we can share insight with the customer, be showing value in a way that gets them to have the moment in their mind where they say, huh, I never looked at it that way before. That is a critical changing moment where you now start to build your trust. You are now a trusted advisor, not just a seller. Those are powerful customer success managers. The sales happen because customers now trust you. You become the person they want to buy from. They don't want to talk to a stranger. They trust you, and they trust the insights you bring. And so the sales come. Also, when the support team, if they're not getting the help that they need from a support team, you're the person they'll talk to because, again, they've built the trust. And so I'm very much aligned with an advisor first approach to sales. And to me, that is the bridge, the ideal bridge between, like, yes, you're an advisor, you provide exceptional depth in the product as the technical expert when they need it to make sure that they're getting the value. But because of the nature of your relationship, the sales come. And so when you
Nice.
talk about revenue insurance, that's been my approach to post sales and customer success, is building an advisor first approach, but where customer success managers are commercially savvy. And so coming back to this conversation, my answer to the individual was, hey, look, I would hope that everyone in the company in one form or another is a seller, because if we are employed by this company, it should only be because we have enough belief in the value that our product is bringing to our customers that we would be excited to talk about it with a stranger on the street, to a neighbor, to a family member, a friend, or an existing customer. And so whilst, yes, you could call that sales, to me, that doesn't feel like sales. If you really believe in the value that we're delivering, then you're just bringing value to your customers. And unfortunately, in that individual's case, that felt too much like sales, and they didn't accept the job.
Oh,
But I think that's really, I don't think it would have worked out for that candidate in the role, because I really do think that you can have super deep technical experts and provide that level of depth for customers, building that level of trust with customers. And by doing that, the sales come. And then it's about just training reps to be comfortable and confident in being able to talk about the value that the product brings, because they know that they've seen it happen time and time again. And when they talk to customers about a success plan and a success path, it's because they have a history, they've seen it play out, and they're just talking about how excited they are to see their customers get the same kind of value.
I love that. And it's, again, it sounds simple, but is profound to make sure first that your customers are using and getting value from what you have sold them, and then making sure that you continue bringing them value. And that
Exactly.
advisor status is so key to doing that. It's not salesy, it's not fake, it is genuine, and it is of great value to them. I have been on the customer side where I've been the customer in a technical sale, and I did not have that experience. And I left very quickly because I couldn't use the tool to its maximum value, and there wasn't an advisor, but I was getting a lot of emails about what can we upsell you. And I was getting a lot of communication like that. I was like, guys, I don't even know how to use what I bought. Just, we got to stop this. And
Yeah.
it was tough to extract, but it's fragile. And again, just from the sales perspective, because that's kind of my starting point, it's very easy to celebrate a win and underestimate the amount of work that comes after that to ensure that we get to enjoy that continued revenue stream for its fullest potential. And I think it's a tremendously important part of the organization to make sure that our customers are continuing to get value from not only what we sold them first, but what we could bring them today and tomorrow and over the course of the relationship. And I think that's incredibly beautiful. And Doug, you have unpacked it so well for us. For those of us that are not on that side of the transaction, I deeply appreciate you sharing those insights. And as we get ready to wrap up, let me ask you: is you've shared with us some of the metrics that companies should pay more attention to. So I'm curious, as you look at the post sale world, what is one question that every CEO should ask their CS or implementation leader?
Hmm. I think the CEOs need to know how their top customers are doing.
Nice.
And I think there's a lot of depth to that. Now, let me unpack this a little bit. We've talked a
Yes,
lot
please do.
about,
Because again, there's a lot of depth,
yeah,
even though it does sound simple.
we've talked about AI. We've talked, how that's helping humans get more and more scale. Um, I I think there are a couple of things that are very hard to track. That CEOs have to. There's the what I believe button they have to be willing to push, or the what must be true scenario. And I think two things are happening. That one, AI. Look, I mentioned earlier I'm a Zennial. I remember the era early in my career when you'd stand in front of a copy machine for an hour or more, going through reams
Yes.
of pages of paper and creating binders and like all these things that we don't
Yes.
do anymore.
Right.
There was more, I will call it mental downtime in kind of less demanding work that is now being automated through AI. And I'm seeing a shift where AI now forces us to, like, while we may be putting in a similar level of time and effort, the mental effort is significantly more demanding. There's no more standing in front of the copy machine or manually reading through documents looking for things because AI is handling so much of this now. And so now it's high cognitive demand, designing prompts, building agents, auditing the work sometimes of the AI because it doesn't always get it perfect. And these are high cognitive load jobs. And the risk with that, if you're familiar with Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma and kind of his whole philosophy is like, we start to lose some of the mental bandwidth for deep work. If there's a lot of work there from Cal Newport that's fascinating around deep work. Bill Gates with his Think Weeks, where he just goes to a wooded cabin for a week and just reads and challenges himself to think deeply about the mega trends that are happening in the world, right? We lose some of that if we're in high cognitive load all the time, just going from one agent to the next agent to the next prompt. And there needs to be time for the deep work of reflection to make sure that we're still steering the ship in the right direction. So that's one. Very hard to measure, but I've time and time again, when we start to reduce that, it erodes at our ability to execute. Number two is in-person connections. This one falls a little bit. I remember back in business school, a marketing professor having this joke that was saying, hey, we know that about 50% of marketing dollars are highly effective. We just don't know which 50%. and look, it was a joke at the time, but I think it's similar with in-person connections. Look, it's one thing to just talk to customers, but in my experience, and I've had customer success managers document this, and I've seen it in multiple different scenarios play out the very same way, which is when you take a customer to a baseball game or a concert or just a dinner, like, time matters. It's not always, quality over quantity. Sometimes quantity does matter. And
Right.
and when you spend more time with your customers, you build a deeper relationship with them personally. They also just talk more. They'll share more of the challenges that they're seeing in the business, and it creates more opportunities for you as a business to solve more problems for them. And so the human connection is another one. Harder to put a dollar value on from an ROI standpoint, but so critical from a relationship and trust standpoint. Now, so that's where the CEO can ask that simple question, like, how are our top customers doing? Because you can see a lot in the metrics that'll go all the way into the long tail, but it's very hard sometimes to know, like, what's that level of depth with top customers, especially not just the primary administrator, but the economic buyer. What about the board memberships? Like, how does the board, I've seen cases where a new board member comes in, they bring some prior experience with a competitive solution, and you can have a retention issue immediately, very quickly.
Yes. Yes.
Purely because you've been blindsided because of relationships. And so
Yes.
having those relationships deeply entrenched, especially with top customers, will save a lot of surprises down the road.
Wow. There is so much there, Doug. I, and I don't have time to continue unpacking it. Oh, this is driving me crazy.
This has been a great
Um,
conversation. Love it.
oh my goodness. And you just dropped so much wisdom. And I have to tell you around the cognitive bandwidth thing and the fact that because I too, I remember collating workbooks with the little machine
Yeah.
where you put the plastic binder thingy in there and you push the lever down and you put the workbooks together. That was a lot of mental downtime. Doug, I feel seen. Thank you. I feel this has been great. You can send me the bill. Thank you. But I do. I can identify with that. And it's true when we go to one highly cognitive task to the next. I have seen organizations struggle because it's almost like they're in constant fire mode.
Yeah.
There's so much happening all the time that they don't have time to sit down and say exactly what you're saying. What is happening with our top customers? And what do we do with what we learn? Do we invest more in how we handle this, or do we invest more on the product roadmap, just like you were talking about earlier? What do we do with what we learn? And that takes some deep thought, which takes some downtime. Amazing. Doug, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your time and your insights and your experiences so generously. If people want to follow up with you, where can they find you?
Best place is LinkedIn. Happy to connect with other people thinking about the post sales and customer success space. I think there's some exciting things happening here. So I'm linkedin.com/in/Doug Norton.
Excellent. Thank you. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for spending time with us here. You are busy. You've got other things you could be doing, and we deeply appreciate that you chose to spend your time with us here. And it was a rich conversation. And go ahead and listen to it again. And human to human connection is where the best growth happens. So if you know somebody else who might enjoy this, another CEO, another leader, please share this with them. And that's it for today on Revenue Unscripted. Thank you so much. Join us next time. Thanks.